G'day folks, welcome to part 11 of the 3Racing Sakura Ultimate build series. Part 11 we will be assembling and attaching the shocks, and as I always say, if there are multiple of the same thing, I'll go ahead and do the majority of them and then leave the last one to do on camera. So as we see here, I have built 3 of the 4 shocks. They're all exactly the same, so there's no difference. This suspension system, the shock body itself, the parts that make it up are a little bit different. They're quite the same as other companies like Associated, X-Ray, Losi, whatever. But there are a few things I think they could have added in. For instance, on a lot of companies, at the bottom here, they'll quite often put an O-ring at the bottom. There's no O-ring on this one. Same at the top, they might put an O-ring just above where you put the shock cap on. There's usually an O-ring there. There's not. This is the 3Racing design, so I'm trusting them that they know what they're doing. So anyway, things you will need obviously are the parts necessary. You'll need shock oil, and you will need you don't need these, but they come in handy. These are ball pivot and shock pliers. The ball pivot section, they're for popping off your camber links on, for instance, pop off the camber link and that. If you look closely, you'll see that there are grooves in there. Shock shaft will sit in that, so you'll need those. They're an optional extra. Another optional extra is what I use is Team Associated Factory Team Green Slime. I find this is a better thing to use for sealing the shock at the bottom. This isn't a necessary thing. It is what I use for assembly. It is a shock pump. I said shock pump, do not confuse it with something else. And it isn't necessary, but for assembly purposes it'll speed up the process, because what it does is it sucks the air out of the shock. Okay, so we'll get on to the assembly. First of all, what we'll do is we'll start with the spacer, put it in, get some green slime. Now at this point usually you would put some shock oil in there. I'm using the green slime instead. Don't have to put tons of it in, but you want enough to go around. Then we'll put in our O-ring. Then we'll put a little more green slime around it. So the green slime will look, well, you probably can't tell. I'm trying to get it to focus, but there you go. So it's the green slime, and we'll put a cap on the top. Now take note of the orientation of the cap. There's like a little dual layer on top that has to face away from the shock, so then we can put on the cap and it'll fit in snugly. Alright, so now let's assemble the shock piston or shock shaft. The piston, very carefully, 2 E-clips are required. And do it over your table like this, because what can happen is, it's happened to me, you'll slip and the E-clip will ping off, and then you're spending 45 minutes on your hands and knees looking for a tiny E-clip on the floor. And some kits give you a few extras, but this kit's only giving you enough for what you need. And it's going to fight me, this one. I need to demagnetize my pliers. Unfortunately, because I fly model aeroplanes, I have this in my toolbox, and it quite often sits next to a rather large magnet that I use for picking up things off the grass. Okay, so that's the shock shaft assembly, eclipse and the piston. So now what we'll do is we'll insert it into the shock, and then we'll just wipe off the excess green slime that comes through like that. Now with our shock shaft pliers, it'll sit in the groove like that, and we'll just start to thread on the little collet at the bottom, and I'll just use a screwdriver to do it up all the way. Alright, so now what we'll do is we'll put this in our shock pump. Now I don't know what the go is, but it's hard to show you now because I've already used this, but when I first got this, the bottle was actually half full. So I don't know if they're only just giving you enough to do 4 shocks, or it was a Friday afternoon job and they're in a hurry to get off work and didn't fill the bottle completely. So anyway, we fill it up all the way, and then what we'll do is we'll take it back out. Then what we'll do is you push the shock shaft up, pull it back down, and you'll see little air bubbles. So now what we'll do is put the cap on this, and then we'll pump away. Now you probably can't see it too well, but see how it's sucking out all the air bubbles? That's what the idea of this is to do. Now if you're doing this by yourself and you don't have one of these, doesn't matter if you don't have one of these, find a way to prop the shock up. Another alternative, here's another shock tool. You just put your shocks in there. That's just an alternative. What you can do, what I usually do if I'm not recording this like I am now, I will fill the shock body up and obviously push the shock shaft up and back down again, so the piston sucks the air up and pushes it out. I would normally let the shock sit for about half an hour to 40 minutes. I mean, that's what I do normally, but obviously for the sake of filming we don't have half an hour. So what I'll do is just keep pumping a little bit more. Alright, so while that's doing its thing, what we'll do next is we'll get our O-ring, and this is for the collar that goes onto the shock body. This will adjust your preload and your ride height. So carefully insert it in, and just with your fingernail or with your finger, just make sure it sits snugly inside the little collar, and put that in on the shock cap, because the shock cap comes in 2 pieces. Alright, so that seems to be done. Alright, now this comes the next part. Now what I'm doing is I only want about 25% rebound, so what I'm going to do is, if you want 100% rebound, you will leave the shock shaft all the way down. If you want 50% rebound, you push it halfway up, but in this case I only want 25%, so I'll only have a quarter of the shock shaft sitting out. Then we'll get our bladder, put it in, don't worry about the excess oil, and we'll put the cap on. Make sure you don't cross thread it. Do it up tight. And then when you push it in, it skews all the oil, but when you push it in, see how it comes out a little bit? That's how much I want. Alright, so with a rag, just wipe off all the excess oil. This is probably one of the messiest parts of building any RC car, whether it's nitro or electric, on-road, off-road. Building the shocks is probably the messiest part. Alright, so now what we'll do is we'll put the collar on. Again, make sure you don't cross thread it, because you'll damage the shock body. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just put the screwdriver in. We'll do it up all the way. We'll adjust it when I go. I'll adjust it when I go to have it on the setup station. So we'll put the spring on and the bottom collar. And to check to see if there's anything binding, which it isn't. So that's the shock built. So now what we'll do is we'll attach it to the chassis. Let's move that out of the way. And it's quite simple with this particular kit. Just line it up on the collar, click, one more click, and there you go. Pretty easy. So that's it attached. So that's the suspension system. Then that's the end of part 11. Part 12, pretty much we'll be going into the electronics, be installing the servo and the motor, and then part 13 will be installing the receiver and electronic speed controller. Well, actually what I'll do is I will install the receiver because it's a no-brainer of what to do. But what I'll do is I'll install the ESC and show you how to solder the motor. So stay tuned everyone.